The year is 1898, and in the city of Herzebede in Germany, Herzogenaurach, a boy is born, and they named it Rudolf. His last name was Dassler, Rudolf Dassler. 2 years later, Rudolf gets a brand new brother, and they named him Adolf. In this town we just named, everybody was a shoemaker. They either made shoes or they repaired them. Even with all that, these boys' parents had a bakery because those shoemakers needed to eat as well. When Rudolf and Adolf grow up, they help their dad inside the bakery, and on the side, these boys loved playing football. At the end of World War I, since these boys were at the proper age to go to war, they were sent off to the battlefield in the year 1918. This year is extremely lucky for them. Since it was 1918, the war was over in only a few months, and like usual, Germany is defeated. After the war, they returned to their town, and since they loved football so much, they tried to design something that relates to this sport. Adolf was a more engineer type person, and since he grew up around shoemakers and repairmen, he knew a lot on how shoes worked and how they were designed. And that is why he started designing a sports shoe, something that had not existed before then. You might ask, how did they play football? Until then, every sports athlete or anyone that wanted to play sports, they just wore normal dress shoes. And after the game, everybody had foot pain. These two brothers start producing athletic shoes, and they make the same amount as their hometown football team and give them to the team to try out for a game. The players love the shoes, and when the coach realizes how much better the players are playing, he really wanted to buy more shoes from these brothers. But this time when he put an order, it wasn't free anymore, and he had to pay for those shoes. When these two brothers get their first client, they realize what they're doing is pretty legit, and they took it more seriously and got even more motivated. One of the first things they do is create their business, and they named it Gebruder Dassler Shoe Fabrik, which basically means the Dassler Brothers Shoe Factory. Adolf, the little brother, was the engineer behind it all, and the Rudolf was the marketing guy behind it all, and he was very charismatic and talked the customers into buying anything. Word gets out that these shoes are being produced in this town, and other cities order them. When we get to 1923, the Dassler Brother factory is producing about 50 pairs of shoes a day, and that's for running track and football. We get to the year 1928, when the Olympic Games are going to be held in Amsterdam. The Dassler Brothers Shoe Fabrik at this time is very famous, and a lot of athletes are ordering these so they can use them in the Olympics. At this time, the Dassler Brothers are extremely busy, but they're still a very small factory and they don't have a lot of employees. When we get to 1933, the Nazi regime has taken power and Adolf becomes the leader, but not Adolf Dassler, Adolf Hitler. When these two brothers realize what kind of a government they're up against, they decided to join the Nazi regime for a business tactic. Time passes and we get to the year 1936, the year where the Olympics is going to be held in Berlin, Nazi Germany. Hitler really wanted to show the world that the Germans are better at everything, and that is why the German factories were allowed to sell their products to anyone participating in the Olympic Games, and that includes the Dassler brothers. The Dassler brothers contacted all the athletes participating in this event and asked them to use their shoes free of charge. Like one of the most famous ones is Jesse Owens, a runner from the US who was black. And of course the Nazi regime hated him. He was black and he was from the US. Even with all that, the Dassler brothers gave him the shoes. With these shoes, Jesse Owens pretty much destroyed any record he attempted. Jesse Owens got 4 golden medals in that year of the Olympics. Even though all the attention was on Jesse Owens in the Olympics, they also paid attention to his shoes because it was very unique. After the Olympics, the Dassler brothers shoe factory got more famous than ever, and they're kind of working worldwide by now. But this success causes these two brothers to fight out over anything. Any decision they want to make, they argue over on what is happening or what they want to do. You could basically say that all the employees that watch these two brothers work, they always saw them arguing over every decision. Eventually, we get to 1939 and World War II begins. Even though these two brothers were successful factory owners, but since they were young, they were told they had to join the army and they were forced to sign up. They were lucky because they were sent to the Air Force and they were never in the front lines while there. After the war is over, the Americans capture these two and arrest them. They release all the soldiers except these two and ask them, "You guys aren't normal soldiers. Why did you join the Nazi regime?" These two go to jail for a year and eventually they realize that they had nothing to do with the regime itself. To make business better and make their factory work easier, they joined the regime, and that is why they were released. When these two brothers were in the American prisons, their relationship got worse and worse because the big brother Rudolf would always tell the Americans that it was Adolf's idea to join the regime and he should let me go. But the Americans realized that both of them had nothing to do with the regime and they were just released. But the relationship between these two had already been ruined, especially Adolf towards Rudolf, and they really couldn't continue working with one another. After they were released, these two brothers go back to their hometown, the same name I've said before, and they continue working while hating each other. The factory was ruined and taken over, but after they were released, everything they had was given back to them. And it was 50-50 for everything they had. They even gave 50% of the patents to one brother and 50% to the other. When we get to 1948, Adolf has created a factory and he's trying to produce new shoes once again. The Dassler brothers couldn't work anymore because that name was ruined. Adolf was looking for an easier rememberable name and eventually he found it, Adidas, which is basically the short version of his first and last name, Adolf Dassler. Rudolf wanted to do the same thing, but it wasn't that interesting. He first put Ruda, but he didn't like it and changed it to Puma. Both of them in the same city you were talking about, Herzogenaurach. The beef between these two brothers gets so famous that everybody in this city realizes what is happening, and that caused people to either wear Adidas and the other people wear Pumas, and whichever side you wear, this is the side you pick. Both brothers continue expanding and they go up at a pretty much equal rate. But Adidas' growth was a little quicker. When we get to 1974, both of these companies are at peak level. In this year, the bigger brother Rudolf dies at the age of 76 years old. 4 years later, in the year 1978, Adolf dies at the age of 78. Both of these brothers were in the same cemetery, but one was on the other corner and the other was on the other side. They didn't even want their dead bodies to be close to each other. Even with all this, it was obvious that these two had squashed the beef before, but they decided to not keep their friendship public because having this beef between these two companies is good for business. After these two brothers die, the companies continue their growth, and when we get to the year 1986, the company of Puma enters the stock market. 9 years later, in the year 1995, Adidas also joins the stock market, and after this, it was basically part of the stock exchange, and the Dassler family didn't no longer own the entire thing. These two German companies were the #1 sports brand for decades, and then eventually in the year 1989, the American company Nike passed these two and became the #1 sports brand in the whole world. But this is a story for another video.